At the family party, my sister introduced me to her boss with a mocking smile saying, "This is the failure of our family." My parents laughed and nodded in agreement. Her boss remained silent, quietly watching them. The air grew heavy, even the clinking of glasses stopped. Then he smiled faintly and said, "Interesting because you are fired. My name is Nia, and at 32 years old I have spent a decade being the punching bag for a family that values appearance over integrity. But before I tell you how my sister Kesha lost everything in 10 seconds flat, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who was actually the only one holding it together. The rented penthouse in Buckhead was suffocatingly loud, filled with the cloying scent of expensive perfume and desperation. My younger sister Kesha was the center of attention, swirling her champagne glass in a dress that cost more than my first car. She was celebrating her promotion to VP of Marketing at Sterling Corp, a position my parents, Marcus and Betty, never let me forget I did not have. I stood near the balcony wearing a simple black suit, trying to blend into the curtains. I was only here because my mother had threatened to throw away my childhood photo albums if I did not show up to support my sister. But support was not what they wanted. They wanted a prop, a contrast to make Kesha shine brighter. Kesha spotted me, and her eyes lit up with malice. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight and painful, pulling me toward a tall, imposing man in a charcoal suit. It was Jonathan Sterling, the CEO. "Mr. Sterling," Kesha chirped, her voice rising an octave. "This is the sister I told you about. Nia, she is still finding herself at 32. We try to be patient, but honestly, she is the failure of our family." "My mother?" Betty chimed in, instantly laughing as she sipped her drink. "Oh, do not pay Nia any mind, Mr. Sterling. We poured all the talent into Kesha. We tried with Nia, but some investments just do not yield returns." "My father," Marcus nodded solemnly, adding, "She is lucky we let her in the door looking like that." I said nothing. I just locked eyes with Jonathan Sterling. The room went silent, waiting for the great man to laugh at the family joke, waiting for me to shrink away in shame as I always did. But Mr. Sterling did not laugh. His gray eyes drifted from Kesha to me, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of recognition, a nod so subtle only I caught it. Then he looked back at Kesha, who was still grinning like a Cheshire cat. "Interesting," he said, his voice low but carrying across the silent room. "Because you are fired." Kesha let out a high-pitched giggle, touching his arm playfully. "You are so funny, Mr. Sterling. You almost scared me." "I am not joking," Mr. Sterling said, stepping back from her touch. He snapped his fingers, and two large security guards materialized from the shadows wearing earpieces. "Hand over your company phone and your access badge, Miss Williams." Immediately, the color drained from Kesha's face, leaving her looking ash-gray under the crystal chandelier. "But this is my party," she stammered. "I just got promoted." "You were promoted based on falsified numbers," Mr. Sterling said coldly. "And I do not employ liars, I do not employ thieves, and I certainly do not tolerate employees who do not realize who they are actually standing next to." He glanced at me again, but my parents were too busy hyperventilating to notice. The guards stepped forward, effectively boxing Kesha in. One of them held out a hand expectantly. "Give it up, Kesha," I said, my voice calm amidst the rising panic. "Do not make this worse." Kesha spun around, her eyes wild with humiliation and rage. She shoved her phone into the guard's chest and then screamed at me, spittle flying from her lips. "This is your fault. You did this. You brought your bad luck in here and ruined my night. You are just jealous because I am a star, and you are nothing. Get out of my face. I never want to see you." Again, as the security guards grabbed her elbows to escort her out of her own party, I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text message confirming that Phase 1 was complete. I watched my sister being dragged toward the elevator, kicking and screaming, and I knew this was only the beginning. The silence in the penthouse was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps as Brad pushed his way through the stunned crowd. My brother-in-law adjusted his silk tie, a nervous tic I had noticed whenever he was about to lie or posture. He stepped right into Jonathan Sterling's path, blocking the exit with the kind of unearned confidence that only a man like Brad could possess. "You cannot just walk away after doing this," Brad announced, his voice booming in the quiet room. "We will sue you for wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. Do you have any idea who my family is? You are making a massive mistake, Mr. Sterling." I watched from the corner, holding my breath. Brad was used to his last name opening doors, but he clearly did not understand that Jonathan Sterling owned the buildings those doors were attached to. Mr. Sterling did not even blink. He looked at Brad with the kind of detached curiosity a scientist might have for a bug under a microscope. "I suggest you save your legal fees for your own defense," Mr. Sterling said, his voice ice cold. "You are going to need every penny." Then he looked past Brad directly at me. For a brief second his expression softened. It was a look of shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the work we had done in the shadows to bring this moment to light. He gave me a barely perceptible nod before signaling his security team to clear a path. They swept past Brad, leaving him standing there, impotent and red-faced. As the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind Mr. Sterling, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The target was gone, so the wolves needed a new one. Slowly my parents turned toward me. My mother, Betty, marched across the room, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She did not look at Kesha, who was sobbing into a napkin. She did not look at Brad, who was furiously typing on his phone. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Look at you," she hissed, grabbing the lapel of my black blazer. "You did this. You came here with your bad energy and your cheap clothes just to humiliate your sister." I stood my ground, feeling the familiar sting of her rejection. "Mom, Kesha just got fired for fraud," I said, my voice steady. "How is that my fault?" "Because you are jealous," my father Marcus shouted, stepping up beside my mother. "You have always been jealous of Kesha. You could not stand to see her happy, could you? You had to come here looking like a beggar just to remind everyone that she comes from the same trash as you." My mother ripped her hand away from my jacket, as if touching me burned her. "We told you to stay away," she spat. "We told you this was a high-class event. But no, you had to show up in this raggedy suit looking like you just came from a funeral. You wanted to shame us. You wanted Mr. Sterling to look at you and wonder why Kesha has such a failure for a sister." I wanted to laugh. The blazer I was wearing was vintage Chanel, sourced from a private collector in Paris, and worth more than the engagement ring Brad had bought with a maxed-out credit card. But I said nothing. I let them pour their venom. I let them reveal exactly who they were. Brad looked up from his phone, his face twisted with a mixture of fear and rage. He needed someone to blame for the disaster that had just befallen his gravy train, and I was the perfect scapegoat. He walked over to where I stood, his blue eyes cold and dismissive. He looked me up and down, curling his lip in disgust. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Brad," I started, but he cut me off. "I said get out," he snarled, stepping into my personal space. "I do not want to see your face. I do not want to smell your poverty. You are a stain on this family, Nia. Leave before I have security throw you out into the street where you belong." The heavy oak door slammed in my face with a finality that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of chaos erupting inside. Kesha was wailing like a wounded animal. My mother was shouting instructions at the catering staff to pack up the food before it went to waste. My father was likely pouring himself another drink to drown out the reality that their golden ticket had just been revoked. I straightened my vintage blazer and smoothed down my skirt. A younger version of me would have been pounding on that door, begging them to let me back in, begging them to understand that I was not the enemy. But that girl died 10 years ago. She died on the day I walked out of my college dorm to find my parking spot empty. I remembered the panic, the way my heart hammered against my ribs, thinking my car had been stolen. I called my father in tears only to hear him sigh with annoyance. "We sold it, Nia," he had said as if discussing the weather. "Kesha needs a custom Vera Wang for the wedding. You can take the bus to your classes. It builds character." They sold my first car, the one I had paid for with 3 summers of lifeguarding, just so Kesha could look like royalty for one day. They sacrificed my mobility for her vanity. Standing in that hallway, I realized nothing had changed. They were still willing to throw me to the wolves to keep Kesha warm. I turned on my heel and walked toward the elevator. My steps were light. I did not feel the crushing weight of rejection anymore. I felt the cold clarity of a surgeon preparing to cut out a tumor. The valet looked at me with pity as he pulled up my rusted Honda Civic. It was a dented gray eyesore amidst a sea of Bentleys and Porsches. To my family, this car was proof of my failure. To me, it was the perfect camouflage. No one suspects the woman driving a beater is holding the keys to their destruction. I slid into the driver's seat, and the smell of old fabric and stale coffee welcomed me. Locked the doors, shutting out the humid Atlanta night. The dashboard clock glowed a dull green. It was time I pulled my encrypted phone from the hidden compartment under the seat. The screen illuminated my face in the darkness. I dialed a number that was not saved in my contacts. It rang once. Status. A deep voice answered. I looked up at the penthouse balcony where I could see Brad gesturing wildly, probably trying to call his lawyers. He did not know it yet, but his war chest was already empty. Execute Phase 1. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Freeze everything. The offshore accounts, the joint investment portfolio, the emergency fund, my parents think is hidden under Brad's name. I want every card they own to decline by midnight. Understood, the voice replied. The hunt is on. I hung up and put the car in gear. As I drove away from the luxury high-rise, I watched the lights of the penthouse flicker in the rear-view mirror. They thought they had kicked me out into the cold. They had no idea they had, just locked themselves in a cage, and I was the one holding the only key. The morning sun hit the pavement in Buckhead with a glare that felt like an interrogation light. Kesha stood inside the bank lobby, tapping her manicured nails against the granite counter, while Brad argued with the teller. He was wearing yesterday's suit crumpled and smelling of stale scotch, but he still carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had never been told. "No, try it again," Brad commanded, his voice echoing in the quiet branch. "It is a platinum card. There is no limit." The teller, a young black woman who looked unimpressed, slid the heavy metal card back across the glass. "I have tried it 3 times, sir," she said, calm and professional. "The account has been frozen by the fraud department. Your assets are inaccessible. Next in line, please." Brad snatched the card back, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "This is a mistake. I will have your job for this. Do you know who my father is?" Kesha grabbed his arm, pulling him away before security could intervene. People were staring. The whispers had already started. They walked out into the humid Atlanta morning, expecting to find solace in the climate-controlled luxury of their Porsche Cayenne. Instead, they found a tow truck. A burly man in grease-stained coveralls was hooking chains to the undercarriage of the SUV. "Hey," Brad shouted, running toward them. "Get your hands off my car. That is a $90,000 vehicle." The driver did not even look up. "It is a repo order, buddy. Lease was under Sterling Corp. They canceled the contract this morning. You want it back? Take it up with them." Kesha watched as the car was hoisted into the air, exposing the dirt underneath. It was a perfect metaphor for her life, shiny on top, filthy underneath. They had to call an Uber to get back to the penthouse, but when they arrived, the humiliation deepened. A bright orange eviction notice was plastered across the double doors. The locks had been changed. A security guard stood by the elevator, arms crossed, blocking their path. "You cannot go up," he said. "Personal effects will be boxed and sent to your address on file. The premises are sealed pending a forensic audit. They were homeless, they were broke, and they were standing on the sidewalk in last night. See clothes." Brad turned on Kesha, his eyes wild. "Call your parents." Now Kesha dialed her hand, shaking so hard she nearly dropped the phone. "Mom," she sobbed when Betty answered. "They took everything. The car. The apartment. We have nowhere to go." Betty did not ask what Kesha had done. She did not ask about the fraud. She panicked. "Oh my God, my poor Brad!" Betty cried. "Marcus, get the safe. We have to help them. Listen, baby, do not worry. Daddy is going to the pawn shop right now with my diamond tennis bracelet and the emerald necklace. We will wire you cash. Just tell Brad to hold on. We will not let him fall." They were selling their retirement safety net to catch a falling knife. They were liquidating their legacy to fund a con man. Kesha hung up, sniffing, wiping mascara from her cheeks. "Mom is sending money," she said. Brad let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "Good. At least someone in your family is not useless." Before Kesha could respond, a gray sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a cheap suit stepped out, holding a thick manila envelope. He looked from a photo in his hand to Kesha's tear-stained face. "Kesha Williams?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "You have been served." He shoved the envelope into her chest and walked away. Kesha tore it open, her eyes scanning the legal jargon until they landed on the bold text at the bottom. "Civil lawsuit for embezzlement and breach of contract. Plaintiff Sterling Corp. Damages sought $3 million. Kesha screamed a sound of pure terror that made the pigeons on the sidewalk scatter. The ground had opened up beneath her, and there was no bottom in sight. My phone vibrated against the worn leather of the passenger seat, illuminating the dark interior of my Honda with the word "Mom" flashing across the screen. For a brief, foolish second, my heart skipped a beat. A tiny, childlike part of me wondered if she was calling to apologize. Maybe the shock of seeing Kesha humiliated had snapped her back to reality. Maybe she realized she had bet on the wrong horse. I picked up the phone and answered. "Hello. Nia, you need to come home immediately." Her voice was not soft, it was not apologetic, it was sharp and commanding. The tone she used when the dog had an accident on the rug, or when the help didn't scrub the baseboards to her liking. I paused, gripping the steering wheel. "Why?" "Because your sister and her husband are in a crisis," Betty snapped. "They have lost everything. Nia, the penthouse, the cars, the accounts. Everything is frozen. We are moving them into the family home until this misunderstanding with Mr. Sterling is sorted out." "Misunderstanding," I repeated quietly. "It was embezzlement." "Mom, do not use that word," she hissed. "It is a mistake. A clerical error." But my poor Kesha is in a state of shock. She cannot lift a finger right now, and Brad, well, Brad is a guest. He is not used to hardship. We cannot expect a man of his stature to be doing laundry or cooking meals. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of her delusion. "So what do you want me to do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I need you here," Betty said, her voice brooking no argument. "You are not working. You have nothing going on in your life anyway. So come home. You can take the guest room downstairs. The small one. We are giving the master suite to Brad and Kesha, obviously. But I need you to handle the house. You will cook, you will clean. You will make sure Brad has his coffee exactly how he likes it in the morning. Do not let that poor man lift a finger. Do you understand me? He is going through enough without having to deal with domestic chores." The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to be the maid. They wanted the failure to scrub the toilets while the thief lived, like a king in my childhood home. My blood boiled hot and fast, but I forced it down, turning the heat into cold, hard calculation. This was it. This was the opening I needed to destroy Brad completely. I needed access. I needed to be inside the house on their Wi-Fi, listening to their conversations, watching them when they thought they were safe. I needed to find the paper trail that linked my parents to Brad's laundering scheme. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were dry. My expression was stone. I smiled a cold predator's smile. "Okay, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a submissive whisper. "I understand. I will come home." "Good," Betty huffed. "See you in an hour. And pick up some steaks on your way." "Brad likes ribeye." I hung up the phone. The steaks would be on them eventually, but tonight I was coming home, not to serve but to collect, and the bill was going to be much higher than they could ever afford. I did not drive straight to my parents' house to start my shift as their maid. Drove in the opposite direction toward the financial district. The rusted Honda Civic was just a shell, a costume I wore to keep my enemies comfortable. The real Nia existed behind biometric scanners and non-disclosure agreements. I pulled into the underground garage of the Sovereign building, parking in a reserved spot next to a matte black Range Rover. My real car. I swiped my black key card and took the private elevator to the 42nd floor. The doors opened to a hive of activity screens glowing with real-time data streams and the low hum of servers. My team was already working. "Good evening, boss," my senior analyst Jay said without looking up from his triple monitor setup. I walked past him, throwing my vintage Chanel blazer onto a leather chair. Underneath the family disappointment facade, I was the ghost. The highest-paid forensic accountant in Atlanta. When Fortune 500 companies found bleeding in their ledgers, they did not call the police immediately. They called me. I did not just find the money. I found those bodies, and I buried the perpetrators under a mountain of evidence. That was why Jonathan Sterling had not laughed at me tonight. He knew exactly who I was. The board of directors had hired me secretly 3 months ago to investigate irregularities in the marketing department. I was the one who red-flagged Kesha's promotion. I was the one who traced the $3 million she and Brad had siphoned off to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. The party was a sting operation, and I had orchestrated every second of it. I sat at my glass desk, pulling up the file marked Project Vulture. Brad thought he was smart. He thought he was just skimming off the top of a corporate expense account. But he was sloppy. Arrogance always makes them sloppy. He left digital fingerprints everywhere, assuming no one would look past his prestigious last name and his wife's flashy smile. Jay rolled his chair over to my station, his face grim, holding a tablet. "You need to see this, Nia." We dug deeper, into the secondary shell companies Brad set up. We found the signatories on the accounts used to wash the money. I took the tablet expecting to see Kesha's name, expecting to see another layer of my sister's greed, but what I saw made the blood freeze in my veins. It was not Kesha. Brad had not just stolen from Sterling Corp., he had set up a safety net, a fall guy, or rather, fall guys. "Look at the LLC in the Bahamas," Jay said, pointing to the digital signature. "The registered agents are Marcus and Betty Williams, your parents." I stared at the screen. My father's signature loops large and pompous, my mother's signature tight and controlled. They were right there on the laundering documents. Brad is using their social security numbers and their signatures to launder the stolen funds, Jay said quietly. He convinced them it was an investment opportunity. When the feds come knocking, they are not going to arrest Brad. They are going to arrest your mother and father for international money laundering. Pulled my rusted Honda into the driveway of my childhood home, and for a moment I just sat there staring at the brick facade that hid so many ugly secrets. The lights were blazing inside, a stark contrast to the darkness of my mood. I took a deep breath, checking my reflection in the mirror, pushing the ruthless forensic accountant back down, and pulling the submissive daughter mask firmly into place. When I opened the front door, the first thing I saw was my life scattered across the hallway floor. My books, my old trophies, even the few framed photos I had left behind were piled in a heap, like garbage kicked to the side to make room for Louis Vuitton luggage. The door to my old bedroom was open, and inside I saw Kesha lounging on my bed, wearing a silk robe, while Brad paced the room, complaining about the thread count of the sheets. They had not just moved in, They had evicted my history to make space for their failure. Kesha looked up as I stood in the doorway, her eyes puffy, but her sneer intact. "Took you long enough?" she snapped, ignoring the fact that I had just driven across town to serve them. "Brad is starving and Mom is busy crying in the master bedroom. Go make yourself useful and fix us something to eat and coffee." Black. Brad stopped pacing and looked at me with a smirk that made my skin crawl. He walked over, kicking a pile of my old college textbooks out of his way, as if they were trash. "Yeah, Nia." "Chop chop," he said, his voice dripping with that specific brand of condescension reserved for people he viewed as beneath him. He leaned against the doorframe, looking me up and down with a sneer. "Make it strong. I have a headache from dealing with incompetence all day." I did not argue, I did not scream. I lowered my eyes and walked past them toward the kitchen, playing the part they expected, the obedient invisible sister, the help. As I brewed the coffee, my hands moved automatically, but my mind was racing. I needed to get close to Brad. I needed to see what he was doing on that laptop he had left open on the kitchen island. I poured the coffee into a mug, making sure not to spill a drop. I walked over to where Brad had seated himself at the island, scrolling through his phone with frantic energy. I placed the mug down beside his computer. "Here is your coffee, Brad," I said, keeping my voice flat. He did not even look up, just waved a hand dismissively. "Thanks," he muttered, taking a sip. Then he chuckled, a low, dark sound. "At least you are good for something. Nia. You know, it is actually refreshing to see you embracing your natural station in life. You people are always so much better at manual labor anyway. Stick to what you know, and maybe you will not end up a total washout like your sister." The microaggression hit me like a physical slap. The casual racism wrapped in a compliment. The assumption that servitude was my natural state because of my skin color and my silence. It took every ounce of my training not to pour the scalding coffee into his lap. Instead, I apologized. "Sorry, Brad. Sorry. I will try to be faster next time." I leaned in to grab a napkin, pretending to wipe a non-existent spill. My eyes darted to his laptop screen. It was open to a banking portal. The logo was obscure, a private wealth management firm based in the Caribbean. My heart stopped. There it was in black and white, a wire transfer initiation screen. The destination was a numbered account in the Cayman Islands. The amount was the exact remaining balance of my parents' retirement fund, which they had foolishly entrusted to him. He was not just hiding the stolen corporate money. He was draining my parents dry before he ran. I straightened up, clutching the dirty napkin, my face a mask of dull obedience while inside I was screaming. Brad slammed the laptop shut, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. "What are you staring at?" "Get out of my face." I turned and walked away, my blood running cold. He was preparing to leave, and he was going to leave nothing behind but ash. The dining room table was set with the good china, the gold-rimmed plates my mother reserved for Easter and visits from the pastor. But the food sitting on them was a pathetic contrast. I had scraped together a meal from the back of the pantry spaghetti with a sauce made from tomato paste and water because the fridge was empty and my parents' credit cards were maxed out. Brad sat at the head of the table picking at his pasta with the disdain of a king being served mud. He dropped his fork onto the plate with a loud clatter that made my mother flinch. "This is inedible," Brad announced, pushing the plate away. "Is this what passes for dinner in this house? I am used to Wagyu beef and truffle risotto, not this prison slop." I gripped my napkin under the table. My hands smelled like onions from chopping and my feet ached from standing over the stove for an hour while they sat in the living room watching TV, but I kept my face blank, a mask of dull stupidity. "I am sorry, Brad," I murmured. "It was all we had." Kesha laughed, a cruel, sharp sound she was wearing, a silk turban to protect her hair, picking at a hangnail with the air of a bored princess. "You are so embarrassing, Nia. You cannot even boil noodles, right? Honestly, I do not know how we share the same DNA. I am sitting here plotting our comeback, trying to figure out how to get my husband back on top, and you are serving us garbage. You really are useless." My mother nodded vigorously, her eyes fixed on Brad with a look of desperate admiration. She reached out and patted his hand, ignoring the fact that he recoiled slightly from her touch. "Kesha is right," Betty said, turning her glare on me. "Look at Brad. Nia, look at how he handles adversity. He is sitting here in a crisis and he still maintains his dignity, his class. He has a noble spirit even when he is being served. Swill, you should take notes. Maybe if you had half of his refinement you would not be 32 and alone." The irony was so thick I could taste it. Here was a man who had stolen millions and framed them for it, and my mother was praising his nobility while eating the food I paid for and cooked. But I needed them to believe I was the fool. I needed them to think I was the weak link, so they would step into the trap. I lowered my head, acting chastised. "I am sorry, Mom. I am just stressed," I whispered loud enough for them to hear. "I have been trying to budget carefully. I know I do not have much. Just that little retirement account from my old data entry job. It is only $20,000, but I am terrified of touching it because once it is gone, I have nothing." The silence that followed was instant and absolute. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Brad stopped picking his teeth. He slowly turned his head toward me, his predator eyes locking onto my face. $20,000. Brad repeated, his voice suddenly smooth like oil across water. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. "You have $20,000 sitting in an account, and you are serving us pasta water." I shrank back, pretending to be afraid of my own slip. "Up!" I should not have said that, I stammered. "It is my life savings." Brad smiled, and for the first time all night he picked up his fork and took a bite of the pasta, chewing it slowly while he stared at me as if I were the main course. "Nia," he said softly. "Interesting. We should talk about investment strategies after dinner. Family should help family after all." The air in the kitchen was thick with greed and desperation as Brad leaned against the counter, boxing me in. My mother Betty sat at the table weeping into a paper towel, while my father Marcus paced back and forth like a caged animal. They had smelled blood in the water, specifically the $20,000 I had foolishly mentioned, and they were circling. "It is a simple bridge loan," Nia. Brad said, his voice smooth and persuasive, but his eyes cold and dead. "I have a guaranteed investment opportunity opening up in Zurich tomorrow morning. If I put your $20,000 in, I can turn it into $200,000 by Friday. That saves the house. That gets your parents out of debt. That fixes everything. You want to fix this family, do not you?" I clutched my purse to my chest, feigning terror. "But Brad, that is my retirement money. If I lose it, I will be homeless." Kesha scoffed from the doorway, rolling her eyes. "You are so selfish. We are talking about saving Mom and Dad from living on the street, and you are worried about your little nest egg. You can always earn more money scrubbing floors or whatever it is you do." I looked at my mother, hoping for a sliver of protection. "Mom, please. You know how hard I worked for this." Betty looked up, her face blotchy and hard. "Nia, look at us. Your sister has lost her home. Your father and I have pawned our wedding rings. And you are sitting there hoarding cash like a dragon while we drown. I thought I raised you better than this. I thought I raised a daughter who cared about her flesh and blood." It was the same old song. My sacrifice was mandatory. My survival was optional. I shook my head, stepping back. "I cannot do it. I am sorry." My father stopped pacing. He walked over to me and slammed his hand down on the counter, making me jump. "Enough," Marcus shouted, his voice booming off the cheap cabinets. "You are going to write that check, Nia. If you do not, you are no daughter of mine. You are an ungrateful wretch who wants to watch her own family starve. We fed you, we clothed you, and now when we need you the most, you turn your back. Write the check or get out of my house and never come back." The ultimatum hung in the air. It was the moment I had been waiting for. the moment they proved once and for all that my value to them was measured only in what they could take. I let my shoulders slump, letting out a defeated sob. Okay, okay, please do not kick me out. I will do it. The tension in the room snapped, instantly replaced by a hungry energy. Brad practically vibrated with anticipation as I pulled my checkbook from my bag. My hand trembled intentionally as I wrote out the check for $20,000. But wait, I said, pausing with the pen in midair. My bank is really strict about third-party transfers. Since this is a retirement withdrawal, they need all parties to sign a liability release form. It just says that I am giving this money freely and that you guys accept responsibility for the transaction. Otherwise, they might freeze the funds for fraud. I pulled a thick document from my bag. It was dense, filled with legal jargon and small print. Brad snatched the paper from my hand, barely glancing at it. Fine, whatever. Just give me the pen. He signed it with a flourish. Then he shoved it toward my father. Sign it, Marcus. We need that cash tonight. My father signed. My mother signed. They were so blinded by the check sitting on the counter that they did not read a single word. They did not realize that they had just signed a notarized affidavit of debt assumption and confession of judgment. By signing that document, they had legally acknowledged that they were the primary beneficiaries of Brad's offshore accounts, and they had just accepted full personal liability for every cent of the $3 million stolen from Sterling Corp. I tore the check out and handed it to Brad. He snatched it like a starving dog, holding it up to the light with a grin. You finally did something right, Nia, he sneered. I tucked the signed document safely into my purse, my heart rate steady and cool. They thought they had just robbed me. They had no idea they had just signed their own prison sentences. The house was silent, a tomb built on lies and avarice. I lay awake on the lumpy mattress in the cramped guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the settling groans of the old structure. My parents were asleep, likely dreaming of the windfall Brad had promised them. Kesha was passed out, exhausted from a day of tantrums and delusions. But Brad was awake. I heard the faint creak of the back door hinge, followed by the slide of the glass pane. It was a sound I had memorized growing up. The sound of sneaking out. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. I wasn't the obedient daughter anymore. I was the hunter. I crept down the hallway, pressing my back against the cold plaster wall. The kitchen was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight spilling in from the yard. Through the sliding glass door, I saw the glow of a cigarette. Brad was leaning against the deck railing, his silhouette framed against the humid Atlanta night. He had his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low but carrying clearly in the stillness. Baby. Listen to me, Brad said, a tone of affection I had never once heard him use with my sister. It is done. The transfer is pending. We just have to wait for the bank to open in Zurich. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my oversized t-shirt, my thumb hovering over the record app. I slid the glass door open just a fraction of an inch, enough for the microphone to catch his voice without giving away my position. No, they have absolutely no idea. Brad laughed, a cruel sound that made my skin crawl. Those idiots signed everything. The old man, the mother, even the sister gave me a check. Can you believe it? They think I am saving them. They think I am investing their retirement to buy back their precious reputation. He took a deep drag of the cigarette, the embers glowing angry red in the darkness. Kesha. Please, she is a prop. She served her purpose. Once the wire clears tomorrow, I am gone. I booked the flight to Paris under the alias First Class, just like you wanted. I watched the recording timer tick upward. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Every word was a nail in his coffin. Every confession was a key to my freedom. Let them rot, Brad sneered into the phone. By the time the feds figure out the signature authority on those laundering accounts, I will be sipping champagne on the Seine, and my dear wife and her pathetic parents will be trading their country club memberships for prison jumpsuits. They signed the liability waivers. Legally. They are the masterminds. I am just the victim of their greed. He tossed the cigarette butt into my mother. Prize rose bushes and turned back toward the house. I love you too. See you in Paris. I stopped the recording and saved the file to 3 separate cloud servers before he even touched the door handle. I slipped back into the shadows, my heart pounding a rhythm of cold, hard victory. He thought he was the predator. He did not know he was already in the cage. The morning sun revealed the dust motes dancing in the cramped guest room I was currently forced to inhabit. I had returned from a pretend run to the grocery store to find my sanctuary violated. Kesha was sitting on the edge of my cot, holding my beige leather tote bag. In her other hand, she held a pair of heavy kitchen shears. The floor was littered with strips of buttery, soft calfskin. She looked up at me with a smile that was pure venom. I am doing you a favor, Nia, she said, snipping the handle in two with a satisfying crunch. This knockoff is embarrassing. You are trying so hard to look like you belong in my world, but we both know you bought this at a flea market. Real rich people do not carry bags without logos. You are just a poser. My heart did not race. My pulse did not jump. I looked at the shredded remains of the bag. A limited edition piece from a heritage Italian tannery that I had purchased in Milan 3 months ago. It had no logos because it did not need them. It whispered wealth, while Kesha's wardrobe screamed for attention. I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms over my chest. That was not a knockoff. Kesha, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. That was a handmade structured tote commissioned from a private atelier in Florence. It cost $5,200. Kesha froze for a second, the scissors hovering over the leather remains. Then she threw her head back and laughed, a high-pitched hyena sound that echoed off the thin walls. $5,000. She wheezed, wiping a tear from her eye. You do not even have $5. You are delusional. Nia, you are actually insane. The stress of being a failure has finally snapped your brain. You are sleeping on a cot in your parents' house, eating discount pasta, and you expect me to believe you own a $5,000 bag? You are pathetic. I walked over to the desk and pulled out a small notebook I kept hidden under the lamp. I uncapped a pen and wrote the figure down in neat, precise handwriting. Laugh all you want, I said, closing the book. I am adding it to the debt ledger. That is another $5,000 you owe me plus interest. Kesha stood up, kicking the leather scraps toward me. You are crazy. You are absolutely certifiable. I owe you nothing. You owe me for breathing my air. She opened her mouth to scream more insults, but the sound was cut off by a thunderous booming noise from the front of the house. It was not a polite knock. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of a fist that demanded entry. We both froze. The laughter died in Kesha's throat. Open up, bellowed a deep voice from the front porch. Fulton County Sheriff's Department. We have a warrant. My mother screamed from the living room, chaos erupting instantly. Kesha dropped the scissors, her face turning ash gray. I walked past her, stepping over the remains of my bag toward the front door. I knew exactly why they were here. Brad had not just drained their cash. He had secretly leveraged the deed to their house as collateral for his high-risk loans, and he had defaulted weeks ago. I opened the door to find 3 deputies and a man in a cheap suit holding a clipboard. This property is now under the control of the bank, the man said, looking past me at my terrified parents huddled in the hallway. You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises before we change the locks. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my bones, followed immediately by the sharp snap of the deadbolt sliding home. The deputy taped the neon orange eviction notice over the brass knocker my mother had polished just yesterday. We were standing on the sidewalk, 5 people surrounded by a pathetic pile of hastily packed luggage, while the Atlanta sky opened up and began to pour rain, as if the heavens themselves were disgusted by the display. It was a scene straight out of a tragedy, but the only thing tragic was the delusion my family was still clinging to. My mother, Betty, was sobbing into her hands, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. My father Marcus looked at the house like he had just watched a loved one die, shaking his head in silent disbelief. Then Brad spoke, shattering the moment with the force of a whip crack. "This is unbelievable," he shouted, wiping rain from his forehead with his expensive suit sleeve. "I cannot believe I married into such incompetence. How do you lose a house? Marcus, you told me your assets were secure. You told me this property was free and clear." My father looked up, blinking against the rain, confusion, warring with shame on his face. "Brad, I do not understand. The mortgage was paid. We have lived here for 30 years. I never took out a loan. You must have mismanaged the paperwork." Brad interrupted, his voice loud enough for the neighbors watching from their windows to hear. "You people and your financial illiteracy? It is embarrassing. I try to help you. I try to elevate this family, and this is how you repay me, by dragging me into the gutter with you." He was gaslighting them in real time, blaming them for the debt he had secretly accrued using the power of attorney they had blindly signed over. It was masterful and sickening. Kesha stepped between them, but she did not attack the man who had just insulted her father. She turned on me, her eyes wild and desperate. "It is her!" she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger in my face. "It is Nia. Ever since she came back, everything has gone wrong. She is a curse, a walking jinx. We were fine before you showed up with your bad energy and your jealousy. You brought this down on us. You wanted us to fail." I stood there, letting the rain soak through my shirt, watching them unravel. They needed a villain so badly, they could not see the monster standing right next to them. "I am not the one who signed the deed over to a shell company, Kesha," I said quietly. My voice was lost in the thunder, but the look in my eyes made her step back. Brad sneered, adjusting his wet jacket, looking at us with pure revulsion. "I am done with this circus. I am not staying out here in the rain with you losers. I am checking into the Four Seasons. I need a hot shower and room service. You all can figure out your own mess. Do not follow me." He pulled out his phone, tapping furiously on the screen, presumably to book the presidential suite and summon a black car to whisk him away from the misery he had created. I watched him, waiting for the inevitable collision between his ego and my algorithm. Suddenly, he stopped tapping. His face went from flushed to pale in a heartbeat. He jabbed the screen again, harder this time, as if force could change the numbers. "What is wrong, Brad?" I asked, my voice dripping with false concern. "Service bad out here. Transaction declined," he muttered, staring at the phone in horror. "It says insufficient funds." "That is impossible. I just moved the money." He looked up at us, terror finally cracking his arrogant mask. His escape route had just been cut, and for the first time he realized he was trapped in the storm with the rest of us. The rain was coming down in sheets now, soaking through my cheap disguise and ruining the Italian wool of Brad's suit. He threw his phone onto the wet pavement with a guttural scream of frustration. The screen shattered, much like his ego. His cards were declined, his accounts were frozen, and for the first time in his privileged life, he had absolutely no way out. My mother shivered, clutching her purse to her chest, her eyes darting around the empty street like a frightened bird. She looked at Brad, then at my father, and finally her gaze landed on me. It was not a look of love. It was the look of a parasite seeking a new host. "Nia?" She chattered, her teeth clicking together. "You still have that money, right? The retirement fund? Use it. Get us a hotel room, not a motel. Somewhere decent. We cannot stand out here like vagrants." Brad spun around, wiping wet hair from his eyes. "Yeah, Nia. Fix this. You owe us. After that little stunt with the check, get an Uber, a big one, and do not think this makes us even." I looked at them, shivering and pathetic, stripped of their arrogance by a little rain and a lot of debt. I could have left them there. I could have walked to my car and driven away, leaving them to figure out how to survive in the real world. But that would be too easy. I wanted them to see what they had thrown away. "Fine," I said, pulling out my phone. "I have a place we can go. It is temporary, but it is dry. I tapped the screen, summoning the ride. Within 3 minutes, a sleek black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. The driver, a man in a sharp suit, stepped out with an umbrella, bypassing Brad to hold the door open for me. "Ms. Williams," he said, nodding respectfully. "Good to see you again." Kesha looked at the car, then at me with suspicion. "Since when do you take private cars? You probably spent your whole savings on this ride just to show off. You are so irresponsible." "Get in," I said, cutting her off. They scrambled inside, grateful for the dry leather seats. Brad immediately started complaining about the legroom, trying to reclaim some semblance of status, claiming this was the only way he usually traveled. I sat in the front seat, silent, as we navigated through the city toward the skyline. When the driver turned into the private entrance of the Sovereign, the most exclusive residential tower in Buckhead, the silence in the back seat grew heavy. This was not a Motel 6. This was where rappers, athletes, and CEOs lived. "Why are we here?" my father asked. His voice hushed. I did not answer. The car stopped under the portico. The doorman, a man named James, whom I had known for 5 years, rushed forward to open my door. "Welcome back, Ms. Williams," he said, beaming. "We missed you last week. Shall I have your bags sent up?" "Just these," I said, gesturing to the pathetic pile of luggage my family had salvaged. We walked into the lobby, a cathedral of marble and gold leaf. My mother looked around, her eyes wide with greed and confusion. She leaned in close to me, whispering loudly, "Nia, who do you work for? Do the owners know you are bringing people here? We cannot get in trouble. We cannot afford a lawsuit if you get caught sneaking us into your employer's house. Are they out of town?" I stopped at the private elevator bank, the one that required biometric clearance. I did not answer her question. I did not correct her assumption that I was merely the help meant to scrub these floors, rather than walk on them. I stepped up to the panel and pressed my thumb against the glass. The scanner glowed green and the doors slid open with a soft chime. "After you," I said, gesturing for them to step into my world. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, revealing a sprawling, open-concept living space, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows, that offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, glittering against the stormy sky. The floors were imported, Italian marble. The furniture was bespoke, mid-century modern, and the art on the walls was original, not prints. It was a space that whispered power and quiet luxury, the kind of place my family had always pretended to belong in but never truly could afford. My mother stepped out of the elevator, her heels clicking on the marble, and gasped, clutching her chest. She spun around in a circle, taking in the sheer scale of the apartment. Her eyes landed on a sculpture by a prominent black artist that she had once seen in a magazine and claimed was too avant-garde for her taste. "Oh my God," Betty breathed, her voice trembling. "This is magnificent Nia, who lives here. Is it a rapper, an athlete? You must be their housekeeper, right? Or maybe their personal assistant. I hope you asked permission before dragging us into this palace. We cannot afford to break anything." Kesha walked past her, running her hand covetously along the back of a velvet sofa. Her eyes were wide with envy, but her mouth was twisted into a sneer. "Please," she scoffed. "It is probably some old man's place, some sugar daddy." Nia hooked up with, desperate for a younger woman, even if she is plain. That is the only way someone like her gets access to a place like this. "So who is he, Nia? Is he 80? Is he blind?" Brad was silent. He was staring at the view, his face pale. He recognized the building. He knew exactly how much a square foot cost in the Sovereign, and he was doing the math in his head, realizing that the numbers did not add up for a simple housekeeper. I walked over to the wet bar and poured myself a glass of sparkling water, not offering them anything. "No one lives here but me," I said, my voice cool and detached. "This is my apartment. I bought it 3 years ago, cash. My mother let out a high-pitched laugh that sounded more like a bark of disbelief. Stop lying, Nia. It is pathetic. You expect us to believe that you, the girl who drives a rusted Honda and wears thrift store clothes, owns a $5 million penthouse. Where would you get that kind of money? You do not even have a real job. I took a sip of water, enjoying the bubbles bursting on my tongue. I do not have a job. You understand, Mom. But I have a career. I am a forensic accountant. I specialize in asset recovery and fraud detection for Fortune 500 companies. I get paid a percentage of every dollar I recover from thieves. I looked directly at Brad, who was now sweating profusely, despite the climate-controlled air. Thieves like Brad, I added softly. Kesha froze her hand still resting on the sofa. You are lying, she whispered, but there was doubt in her eyes now creeping in like a stain. You are just trying to make us feel bad because we lost everything. You are sick. I set the glass down on a coaster. Think what you want. But since you are homeless and destitute, I suppose I can let you stay for the night. I pointed down a long hallway past the master suite, past the guest rooms that were fully furnished with Egyptian cotton sheets. You can sleep in the yoga studio at the end of the hall. There are mats on the floor. Do not touch anything else, and do not go into the other rooms. My security system is sensitive, and I would hate for the police to come back so soon. My father looked at me, his eyes wide with shock and a dawning realization of just how much he had underestimated me. But my mother just stared at the yoga mats, her face a mask of indignation. You expect us to sleep on the floor like dogs. It is better than the sidewalk, I said, turning my back on them. If you do not like it, the elevator is right there. The penthouse was quiet, but the tension was screaming. My family had retreated to the yoga studio, likely arguing over who got the thickest mat, leaving me alone in the living room with Brad. He hadn't gone with them. Instead, he was prowling around my space, touching my things, his eyes calculating the value of every object. He picked up a crystal decanter, examining the label on the whiskey inside, then poured himself a generous glass without asking. You know, Nia, he said, turning to face me, swirling the amber liquid. I have to admit I underestimated you. This place, it's impressive. You've been holding out on us. I didn't look up from my laptop. I value my privacy, Brad. Unlike some people, I don't need an audience for my success. He chuckled, walking closer, invading my personal space. Privacy is expensive, and clearly you can afford it, which makes me wonder, why are you helping them? Your parents treated you like dirt. Kesha hates your guts, yet here they are sleeping on your floor. He sat on the edge of my desk, leaning in close. His cologne was cloying, expensive, but applied too heavily, just like his charm. Let's cut the act, Nia. You're smart. Smarter than all of them combined. You know this ship is sinking. Why go down with it? I finally looked at him. What are you suggesting, Brad? He smiled, that same predatory grin he used to charm my parents out of their retirement fund. I'm saying we're the only two people in this room with any sense. I have resources, connections. Once this little misunderstanding with Sterling blows over, I'm going to be back on top. But Kesha, she's dead weight. Your parents are liabilities. Why should we let them drag us down? He reached out his fingers, brushing my arm. Think about it. You and me. We could be a power couple. Combine your skills with my vision. We could own this city. Forget about them. Let them take the fall. They signed the papers after all. Legally, they're the ones on the hook. We could walk away clean, together. The audacity was almost impressive. He was proposing we abandon his wife, my sister, and my parents to prison while we ran off with the money he stole. So you're suggesting I betray my entire family, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Leave them to rot while we enjoy the spoils. They deserve it. He shrugged. They never appreciated you. I do. I see your potential, Nia. Don't you want to be with a winner for once? I looked at him, then slowly reached for my phone, which was lying face down on the desk. I tapped the screen. "Did you get all that, Kesha?" I asked loud and clear. Brad's face went white. "What?" I held up the phone. "Speakerphone, Brad. They've been listening to every word from the hallway." The door to the hallway burst open. Kesha flew into the room like a banshee, her face contorted with a rage so pure it was terrifying. She didn't scream. She just launched herself at him, her nails aiming for his eyes. "You bastard!" she shrieked, tackling him off the desk. "You were going to leave me, after everything I did for you." My parents rushed in behind her, my father looking like he was about to have a stroke, my mother screaming for them to stop. But it was too late. The veneer of the perfect marriage, the golden couple, was shattered into a million pieces right there on my Italian marble floor. And I just watched, taking a sip of my water. The real show had finally begun. The living room of my penthouse descended into chaos. Kesha clawed at Brad, his face screaming incoherently while he tried to shove her off him with brute force. My mother, Betty, stood in the corner clutching her pearls and wailing as if she were watching a soap opera instead of her own daughter's marriage imploding. "You are crazy!" Brad shouted, finally managing to throw Kesha backward onto the velvet sofa. He touched his cheek and looked at the blood on his fingers, his face twisting into a mask of pure violence. He raised his hand to strike her, and for a second I saw the real Brad, the man beneath the expensive suits and charming smiles. But before his hand could connect my father, Marcus charged across the room. "Do not touch my daughter!" Marcus yelled, slamming his shoulder into Brad's chest. It was a valiant effort, but my father was 65 years old and Brad was 30, and desperate. Brad stumbled back but quickly recovered. He grabbed my father by the lapels of his cheap suit and shoved him hard. Marcus flew backward, tripping over the coffee table and hitting the floor with a sickening thud. "Marcus!" Betty screamed, rushing to his side. Brad straightened his jacket, his chest heaving. "Look at you all. Pathetic. You are nothing but a bunch of parasites feeding off my potential." I stood up, my movement calm and deliberate. I picked up the phone on the end table and pressed a single button. "Security," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "There is an intruder in penthouse A. He is violent. Remove him immediately." Brad spun around to face me, his eyes wide. "You wouldn't." I hung up the phone. "Try me." 2 minutes later, the private elevator doors slid open, revealing 2 armed security guards. They did not ask questions. They saw the blood on Brad's face, the old man on the floor, and me standing there pointing at the door. "Get him out," I said. The guards moved in, grabbing Brad by the arms. He struggled for a moment, but quickly realized he was outmatched. As they dragged him toward the elevator, he stopped fighting and started laughing, a low, dark sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You think you have won, Nia," he sneered, looking back at us over his shoulder. "You think you are so smart sitting in your ivory tower? But you forgot one thing." He looked at my parents, who were huddled together on the floor. "I did not sign anything," Brad said, his grin widening into something truly demonic. "The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the loan applications, they do not have my name on them, they have theirs." He nodded at Marcus and Betty. "When the feds come knocking, they are not coming for me. They are coming for the people who signed on the dotted line. You are all finished." The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off his laughter, but the silence he left behind was even more terrifying. My parents looked at each other, realization slowly dawning on their faces like a creeping frost. They were not just broke, they were the fall guys for a multi-million-dollar crime. The silence in the penthouse was shattered by the rustling of papers as my father Marcus scrambled to open his briefcase. He pulled out the carbon copies of the documents Brad had made them sign earlier that week, the ones they thought were investment authorizations. His hands shook so violently that the papers rattled like dry leaves in a gale. My mother, Betty, leaned over his shoulder, scanning the fine print, her eyes squinting without her reading glasses. "What does it mean, Marcus?" she whimpered. Her voice was thin and reed-like, stripped of all its usual pomp. "What did we sign?" I walked over to the wet bar and poured another glass of sparkling water, watching them unravel. "Read paragraph 4. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through their panic. Marcus adjusted his grip on the paper and read aloud. "Affidavit of beneficial ownership. The undersigned hereby acknowledge full control and liability for all funds transferred to the account, ending in 409. He stopped, his face turning the color of old ash. Looked up at me, terror swimming in his eyes. "This says we own the account. It says we are responsible for the money." "Exactly," I said, taking a sip. "Brad did not just steal the money. He set you up as the owners of the shell company. He laundered the stolen funds through an identity he created for you, using your social security numbers and those signatures you so happily provided. When the FBI traces the wire transfer, they will not find Brad's name. They will find yours." My mother let out a strangled sob, clutching her chest. "Nia, you have to fix this. You are a forensic accountant. You know how to make this go away. Use your money. Hire us a lawyer. Get us out of this. Please, we are your parents." I set my glass down, the sharp clink against the marble echoing in the room. "Fix it," I repeated, a cold smile playing on my lips. "You want me to use the money I earned, catching criminals, to save the people who treated me like a criminal in my own home? You want me to bail you out after you sold my car to buy a dress? After you forced me to be a maid to the man who framed you?" Kesha looked up from the floor, her mascara smeared across her face like war paint. "Nia, please. We are family. You sold me out for a wedding." "Kesha," I said, turning on her, "you sold me out for a lifestyle you could not afford. And you, Mom and Dad, you sold yourselves out for greed. You were so desperate to be adjacent to whiteness, to be close to what you thought was power, that you blinded yourselves. You let a con man walk into your house and you handed him the keys because you liked the way he looked in a suit." My father dropped the papers. They scattered across the floor like white flags of surrender. "We made a mistake, Nia. We were fools, but please do not let us go to prison. We will die in there." I looked at them, really looked at them. For the first time, I did not see the giants who had ruled my childhood with criticism and neglect. I saw 3 small, greedy people caught in a trap of their own making. "I cannot make the evidence. Thou, disappear," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "The wire transfer is already flagged. My team saw to that." My mother wailed, collapsing against the sofa, but I continued, silencing her with a raised hand. "There is one way out, one chance to stay out of a cell, but it requires you to do the one thing you have never done in your lives." What Marcus asked, desperate hope clawing at his voice. "Anything, Nia. We will do anything." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with his. "You are going to testify," I said. "You are going to walk into a courtroom and you are going to tell the world exactly who Brad is. You are going to admit that you were greedy, that you were stupid, and that you were accessories to a crime. You are going to destroy your precious reputation to save your skins. You are going to be the witnesses that bury him." Kesha slumped against the kitchen island, her silk robe stained with tears and spilled wine. She looked like a doll that had been broken and discarded. Her perfect life was a pile of ash, and for the first time she had no one to blame but herself. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, stripped of their usual malice. "I hated you," Kesha whispered, her voice cracking. "I hated you so much. It was not because you were plain, it was because you were smart. You were always the smart one, Nia. Even when we were kids, you saw things I did not. You saw through people, you saw through Mom and Dad. I knew they were using me. I knew I was just their trophy, but I did not have anything else. I was not like you. I could not make it on my own. So I had to be what they wanted. I had to be the pretty one, the successful one, the one who married well because if I was not that, I was nothing. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I was so jealous, Nia. I wanted to be you. I wanted to not care what they thought. But I could not. I looked down at my sister, the golden child who had tarnished so quickly, a part of me. The old Nia wanted to kneel down and hug her, wanted to tell her it would be okay. But that part of me was gone, burned away by years of neglect and the cold, hard reality of the last week. Comforting her now would be a disservice. It would be enabling. I walked to the utility closet and pulled out a gray bundle. It was a standard issue, janitor uniform, heavy cotton, unflattering, and utilitarian. I tossed it onto the floor in front of her. It landed with a dull thud. "Get up," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. Kesha looked at the uniform, then up at me, confusion clouding her teary eyes. "What is this?" "It is your new reality," I replied. "You said you were nothing without them. Well, now you are going to learn how to be something on your own. You want to eat tonight? You want a roof over your head? Then you are going to work for it." I pointed to the spill on the marble floor where Brad had dropped his glass during the fight. "There is a bucket and a mop in the closet. But for that stain, you are going to need a scrub brush and some elbow grease." Kesha recoiled as if I had slapped her. "You want me to clean. I want you to understand what it feels like," I said, leaning down until we were face to face. "I want you to know what it feels like to be invisible, to be the help, to have your value measured by how clean you can make a floor for someone else. You spent your whole life looking down on people who do manual labor, calling them failures. Well, Kesha, welcome to the failure club. Put on the uniform." She stared at me, searching for a trace of the sister she used to bully, searching for a sign that I was bluffing. She found none. Slowly, with shaking hands, she reached out and took the gray shirt. She stood up, shedding her ruined silk robe, and pulled the rough fabric over her head. It hung on her loose and shapeless, stripping away the last of her vanity. 10 minutes later, the sound of stiff bristles scratching against expensive stone filled the penthouse. Kesha was on her hands and knees scrubbing at the wine stain. Tears dripped from her nose, mingling with the soapy water. She was not just cleaning a floor, she was scrubbing away a lifetime of delusion. For the first time in her life, Kesha was sweating for her supper, and the taste of that labor was bitter on her tongue. Hartsfield Jackson International Airport hummed with the chaotic energy of thousands of travelers, but on the high-definition monitor in my command center, Brad stood out like a beacon of desperate guilt. He was wearing a nondescript hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, trying to blend in with the tourists and businessmen. He clutched a single leather duffel bag tight against his side. He thought he was clever. He thought the fake passport he had purchased on the dark web under the name Julian Thorne would get him past the TSA. He thought he was invisible. I sat in my leather chair, sipping cold brew coffee, watching the live feed. My team at the office was mirroring the stream directly to the FBI field office. We had been tracking his location since he left the penthouse. The Uber driver was an undercover agent. The traffic lights had been manipulated to funnel him exactly to this terminal. We were not just watching him run, we were herding him into the slaughter. Brad approached the first-class check-in counter for Air France flight number 682 to Paris. He looked nervous, his eyes darting left and right, scanning for local police. He did not know that the threat was not the uniformed officers patrolling the perimeter. The threat was the data stream he was about to interact with. He handed the agent his fraudulent passport and a black titanium credit card linked to the account in the Cayman Islands. The account he thought was secure because it was technically in my parents' names. I watched the agent take the card. She smiled that professional customer service smile and swiped it. Now I whispered into my headset. My lead analyst hit the execute button. Instantly, a digital blockade slammed down around Brad's financial existence. We did not just freeze the funds. We flagged the transaction code as a priority alert for international money laundering linked to terrorist financing. It was the nuclear option. On the screen, the agent's smile vanished. She frowned at her monitor, tapping a few keys. She looked up at Brad and said something that made him recoil. He grabbed the card back, swiping it again violently. He pulled out a second card, then a third, slamming them onto the counter. He was shouting now, his face contorting with rage, drawing the attention of everyone in the queue. He was demanding to speak to a manager. He was threatening lawsuits. He was making a scene. He was so focused on his declining cards that he did not see the perimeter collapse around him. 4 men in navy blue windbreakers, emblazoned with FBI, moved in from the flanks, moving with the silent precision of sharks. Brad grabbed his duffel bag, turning to run back toward the exit, thinking he could disappear into the crowd, but he slammed directly into the chest of the lead agent. The impact knocked the wind out of him. The agent did not waste time with pleasantries. He spun Brad around and slammed him face first onto the check-in counter, the sound of the impact echoing even without audio. Brad struggled, kicking his legs, trying to scream that he was innocent, that he was being framed, but the metal cuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a finality that ended his life as he knew it. The agents hauled him upright, dragging him past the stunned line of passengers. As they led him away, Brad looked up at the security camera directly above him. His eyes were wild with fear and realization. He knew. In that split second, he knew it was me. He knew the ghost had finally caught up to him. The courtroom was a theater of cruelty, and Brad's defense attorney was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He was a shark in a $3,000 suit, pacing before the jury with a predatory grin. He waved the affidavit. My parents had signed the one I had tricked them into executing, like it was a holy scripture, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he boomed, his voice filling the oak-paneled room. Look at the evidence. The prosecution wants you to believe that my client, Mr. Bradley Thompson, is a mastermind. But the documents tell a different story. A story of a young man manipulated by a greedy family, desperate to climb the social ladder. Look at the signatures. Marcus Williams, Betty Williams, even his wife, Kesha Williams. They are the beneficial owners. They are the ones who authorize the transfers. My client was merely an instrument, a scapegoat for their avarice. I watched from the witness holding room, my eyes fixed on the monitor. Kesha sat at the defense table looking small and broken. Her hair was unkempt, her designer clothes replaced by a drab court outfit. Beside her, my parents huddled together, weeping softly. They looked like what they were frightened. Elderly people who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. Brad, on the other hand, looked radiant. He sat tall, exuding the confidence of a man who believed he could talk his way out of hell. The prosecutor, a weary man with a stack of disorganized files, looked nervous. He knew the paper trail was technically on Brad's side. Without someone to connect the digital dots to show the intent and the coercion the jury might actually buy, Brad's story, that he was just a hapless son-in-law doing what he was told. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, standing up, his voice lacking conviction. The state has one final witness, a forensic specialist who has been tracking the defendant's financial footprint for 6 months. Brad's lawyer scoffed loudly. Another accountant. Unless they were in the room when the money moved, this is a waste of the court's time. The prosecutor ignored him. He turned toward the heavy double doors at the back of the room. The state calls Nia Williams. The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Brad's head snapped around his eyes, widening in confusion. My parents stopped crying, their mouths falling open. Kesha looked up, hope and terror warring on her face. The bailiff pushed the doors open. I stepped into the courtroom. The click of my heels on the terrazzo floor was the only sound in the room. I was not wearing the maid's uniform or the thrift store rags. I wore a bespoke power suit that cost more than Brad's legal defense. My hair was sharp, my makeup flawless, and in my hand, I carried a leather portfolio containing the digital autopsy of Brad's life. I walked down the aisle, not looking at my family. I looked straight at Brad. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by a dawn of pure primal fear. He knew then that the game was rigged and I was the one dealing the cards. The hours preceding my entrance had been a spectacle of humiliation designed to break my family completely. Brad's defense attorney, a man with a voice like grinding gravel, had turned the witness stand into a slaughterhouse. He paced in front of Kesha, who sat huddled in the chair, looking less like a socialite and more like a frightened child. He projected photos of her shoe collection onto the screens, photos I had helped the FBI catalog. "You enjoy the finer things in life, do you not, Mrs. Thompson?" the lawyer asked, his tone mocking. "You married a man with a trust fund, you demanded a penthouse, and when the money was not enough, you demanded he find more. Is that not correct? You are not a victim here. You are a gold digger who got caught with her hand in the cookie jar." Kesha tried to speak, but only a choked sob escaped. She looked at Brad, pleading for him to stop this, but Brad just stared ahead, his face a mask of bored indifference. "I am not a thief," Kesha whispered. "I loved him." The lawyer laughed. "You loved his wallet. And when it was empty, you and your parents decided to refill it with stolen corporate funds. Next, it was my parents' turn. My father Marcus took the stand, his hands trembling so badly he could not hold the water glass. He tried to explain that he did not understand the documents, but the lawyer cut him to ribbons. "You are a grown man. Mr. Williams, you ran a household, you paid taxes. Yet you want this jury to believe that you signed over power of attorney and authorized international wire transfers because you did not read the fine print. Are you senile, sir? Or are you just a liar trying to hide behind your son-in-law?" My father stammered his words, tripping over each other. "I trusted him. He said it was an investment. I do not know about offshore accounts." My mother Betty buried her face in her hands, unable to watch her husband be stripped of his dignity. The jury looked at them with disgust. Brad's narrative was working. He was painting them as the greedy masterminds, and himself as the hapless victim of their ambition. The prosecution looked worried. They had the documents, but they lacked the narrative glue to make the charges stick to Brad. The courtroom grew quiet as the defense rested their cross-examination. Brad leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. He thought it was over. He thought he had won. The prosecutor stood up slowly, adjusting his tie. He walked to the center of the room and looked directly at Brad. The smile on Brad's face faltered. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, his voice ringing with sudden confidence, "the state calls its final witness, the expert who uncovered the algorithm used to hide these assets. I call financial forensic analyst Nia Williams." I arranged my documents on the witness stand with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Brad sat at the defense table, leaning back with his arms crossed, a smirk plastered on his face. He thought I was just another number cruncher boring the jury with spreadsheets. He did not realize I was the Grim Reaper coming for his freedom. I connected my laptop to the courtroom projector, and a complex web of lines and nodes appeared on the main screen. It looked like a chaotic spiderweb to the untrained eye, but to me it was a map of Brad's greed. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and clear, "fraud is designed to be confusing. It is designed to make you look at the signature on the bottom line and ignore the hand that held the pen." I zoomed in on a cluster of red nodes. "Mr. Thompson claims my parents moved this money," I said, pointing to the screen. "And it is true that their names are on the documents. However, digital footprints do not lie. Every single transfer of the $3 million was authorized using a biometric thumbprint scan. That thumbprint does not belong to Marcus Williams. It belongs to the defendant." I pulled up a side-by-side comparison of the login data and Brad's phone records. "Here you can see the geolocations," I continued. "While my parents were asleep in their beds in Georgia, these transfers were being initiated from a device located at a rhythmic gymnastics club. a club where Mr. Thompson holds a platinum membership. Brad's smirk vanished. He sat up straight, whispering frantically to his lawyer, who was now frowning at the screen. But I did not stop there, I knew. Metadata was dry. I needed something visceral, something that would make the jury feel the betrayal in their bones. I have one more piece of evidence. Your Honor, I said, turning to the judge. During the week Mr. Thompson lived in my home, I recorded several conversations under the one-party consent law of this state. Brad's lawyer shot up. Objection? Surprise evidence? It was submitted to the bench this morning. Counselor, the judge said, waving him down. Proceed, Ms. Williams. I tapped the spacebar on my laptop. The courtroom speakers crackled to life, and then Brad's voice filled the air, loud and arrogant. Those idiots signed everything. The old man, the mother, even the sister gave me a check. Can you believe it? They think I am saving them. The jury gasped, shifting in their seats to glare at the defense table. My mother let out a soft wail, covering her mouth with her hand, as she heard Brad mock her. The recording continued, playing the clip from the patio. Let them rot. By the time the feds figure out the signature authority, I will be sipping champagne on the Seine, and my dear wife and her pathetic parents will be trading their country club memberships for prison jumpsuits. I looked directly at Brad as his own voice condemned him. They are the masterminds. I am just the victim of their greed. The audio cut off, leaving a silence so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. You witch! Brad screamed, shattering the quiet. He leaped up from his chair, knocking it over with a crash. You set me up. You planned this whole thing. You jealous little rat. I will kill you. He lunged toward the witness stand, his face purple with rage, his hands reaching out as if to strangle the truth right out of my throat. The bailiffs were moving before he even cleared the table, but the damage was done. The jury did not see a victim anymore. They saw a monster unmasked. The judge's gavel did not sound like a clap of thunder. It sounded like a door slamming shut on a coffin. Bradley Thompson, you have been found guilty on all counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. The judge looked over his spectacles, his eyes hard. You preyed on the trust of a family, and you used their ambition as a weapon against them. You are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Brad let out a strangled cry as the marshals pulled him to his feet. He looked back at the gallery, searching for someone, anyone to save him. But the room was a sea of cold faces. He did not look at Kesha. He did not look at me. He looked at the door, trying to memorize the light, before he was dragged into the dark. Next, it was my family's turn. They stood before the bench, trembling like leaves in a storm. The judge turned his gaze to Kesha. Mrs. Thompson, your ignorance is not a defense. You benefited from stolen funds, and you turned a blind eye to your husband's crimes because the lifestyle suited you. You are sentenced to 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. Perhaps manual labor will teach you the value of an honest dollar. Kesha nodded, tears streaming down her face, her hands gripping the edge of the defense table until her knuckles turned white. Then the judge looked at my parents, Marcus and Betty Williams. You signed your names to fraudulent documents driven by greed. However, the court has taken into consideration the letter of leniency submitted by your daughter Nia Williams. She argued that your foolishness should not be a death sentence. Because of her plea, you will not go to prison. My mother let out a sob of relief, collapsing against my father. However, the judge continued, his voice stern. You are jointly liable for the restitution. Your home, your assets, and your pensions are hereby seized to repay Sterling Corp. You are free to go, but you leave this court with nothing. The final gavel bang echoed in the silence. My parents stood there, saved but destroyed. They had their freedom, but they had lost the one thing they valued more than their children, their status. I stood up, smoothing my suit, and turned to leave. The heavy oak doors swung open and the flash of cameras blinded me. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward like spears. Ms. Williams, how did you catch him? Ms. Williams, is it true you turned in your own family? I pushed past them, my face impassive behind dark sunglasses. I did not stop to give a quote. I did not stop to gloat. I just wanted to breathe clean air. As I reached the bottom of the steps, I felt a gaze burning into my back. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see them. My parents and Kesha stood at the top of the stairs, huddled together in the wind. They looked small and gray, stripped of their arrogance. They were looking at me, not with anger, but with a desperate, hungry pleading. They were homeless. They were broke, and they were realizing that the daughter they had thrown away was the only one left standing. 6 months later, the view from the private dining room at the Obsidian was breathtaking. The restaurant sat atop the very building where my sister had tried to humiliate me, but now the city lights below looked different. They didn't look like a battlefield anymore. They looked like a kingdom I had conquered. I sat at the head of the table surrounded by the board of directors for Sterling Corp. Jonathan. Sterling raised his glass of sparkling water to me, a gesture of respect between equals. To Nia. Williams, he said, his voice warm. The woman who saved this company from rot and became our most valuable strategic partner. We clinked glasses, the crystal singing a clear note of victory. It was a far cry from the plastic cups and cheap wine of my old life. I took a sip, savoring the moment. My phone buzzed in my purse, but I ignored it. I knew who it was. My parents called once a week from a payphone near their subsidized housing complex in Bankhead, usually to beg for grocery money or to blame me for the mold in their bathroom. They were living the reality they had once mocked, surrounded by the poverty they had tried so desperately to escape. I had blocked their numbers months ago, but they still tried. The silence was my answer. Our server approached the table clutching a bottle of vintage Cabernet. She kept her head down, her shoulders hunched in a white uniform that was slightly too large for her frame. Her hands were trembling so badly the bottle clinked against the rim of Mr. Sterling's glass. "Careful," Jonathan said gently. "We do not want to spill a $10,000 bottle." The server froze. Her head snapped up, and for the first time our eyes met. It was Kesha. She looked 10 years older. The spark was gone, her eyes replaced by a dull, exhausted fear. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, no expensive weaves or treatments, just her natural hair fraying at the edges. She looked at me, then at the expensive suit I wore, then at the company I kept. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was serving the sister she had tried to destroy. "Nia," she whispered, her voice cracking, causing the guest to look up. I did not blink. I did not look away. I looked at her with the same detached curiosity Mr. Sterling had shown her 6 months ago. Kesha's hand shook violently, and a single drop of red wine splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. It spread like a bloodstain, a stark reminder of the mess she had made of her life. She gasped, terrified, looking at Mr. Sterling, waiting for him to explode, waiting for the security guards to drag her away. But Jonathan just looked at me. Deferring to my judgment, I reached into my purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I folded it neatly and placed it on the table next to the stain. "It is okay," I said, my voice soft, but carrying the weight of a gavel strike. Kesha stared at the money, tears welling in her eyes. She looked at me, searching for forgiveness, searching for a way back in. But the door was closed and locked. I leaned in close, my eyes locking with hers, echoing the moment that had started it all. "Careful, Kesha," I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "You do not want to get fired again?" I stood up, smoothing my jacket, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the money and my sister behind. I walked out into the cool night air, finally breathing free. I did not look back. The view from the top was beautiful, and I had a lot of work to do. The most powerful lesson from Nia's journey is that your true worth is never determined by those who refuse to see it. For years, her family mistook her silence for weakness and her humility for failure, only to discover that real power often moves in the shadows. While they chased the illusion of status through greed and deceit, Nia built a fortress of integrity and success. Ultimately, you cannot build a lasting legacy on a foundation of lies. The greatest revenge isn't destruction. It is simply outgrowing the people who tried to keep you small and letting their own actions be their downfall. If you believe that success is the best revenge, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.